guys, so today I'm going to be doing a dedicated review to none other than the Saga of the Exiles by Julian May. Now, not a lot of people have heard of this series, and I'm trying to change that. I'm going to do the first half of this series as spoiler-free as physically possible, and then at the very end I might chuck in some spoilers. So you could probably stick around for most of the video, and then I'll let you know if I'm about to go into spoiler territory. This series was written in the 80s by Julian May, and it consists of the Many-Coloured Land, the Golden Talk, the Non-Born King, and the Adversary. Now, this series is a science fiction that could very, very well hold up today. It has things like mental health issues. It has a little bit of a grimdark element with grey morality. It has quite traumatic events that you wouldn't really expect depicted. If you look at like classic sci-fi, where it was at, I wouldn't have necessarily expected the level of, for example, violence, or the fact that sexual assault is mentioned in this, and many other things that you probably think, oh well, it's only now that we're actually starting to talk about these topics. They are portrayed in this series in a very brutal and blunt way, which is quite extreme compared to what I went in thinking about this series. When I first picked it up, I didn't know if it was adult or YA. I thought it'd be that typical classic feel where it's like somewhere in between. You know, Lord of the Rings, is it YA or is it adult? Well, it's got that literary style that means it's adult, but there's no content in it that means it's inappropriate for young adults. I kind of thought that this would be that. It's not. There's swearing in this. There's, as I said, there's rape, there's assault, there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of death. Definitely not for kids. That being said, I'd like to talk about a lot of the elements that make this series amazing. And one of my favourite books of this year is The Adversary so far. So, first we'll talk about what this series is about. This series is about, so we have discovered a way to, travel the galaxy. We have now joined part of a political alliance of multiple alien species all across the galaxy. However, upon discovering how to travel through space, we have also discovered a slight glitch, which basically, if we go through this certain time loop, we go back to Earth, but we go back 6 million years before, to the Pliocene epoch. That basically means that it's back when we were Homo sapiens. Now, at first we just thought, oh, it's a glitch, it's an error, we're going to completely ignore it. And then what happened is we had a revolution, for want of a better word. We had a rebellion occur in the galactic milieu, which is the political alliance of different species. And it was a group of humans that believed that humans should be the dominant species. When the rebellion occurred, they lost, and the few remaining survivors fled through the glitched portal into Pliocene Earth. The galactic milieu, seeing this and knowing that you cannot return, because if you return, you age 6 million years and turn to dust. So knowing that these people could not return, they decided to start using this gate to send through people who are criminals, or in an exchange for execution. You can choose either being executed or being sent to Pliocene Earth. Also, people who want a simpler way of life, who don't want all of the space travel and all of the technology that is going on in this era, people who want to live in a much more peaceful and reserved way, also have decided to use this portal as the way of doing that. So at the beginning of this book, we follow 8 different characters. I'm going to list out their names from here. But yes, we follow 8 characters who travel to Pliocene Earth for different reasons. So we have we have Richard Vors, who is essentially a disgraced pilot. He owned a ship that was for merchandising, and he is one of these that is very racist towards other alien species. Now, a lot of people justify that in their world, saying that it's, you know, too much to overcome at once, where you're suddenly introduced to all of these alien species. But essentially he's a racist. So he hates all other alien species, so he won't trade with them and he won't employ them on his ship. So he has a crew of like-minded people. He receives a distress call from another ship, and then he realizes that it is an alien species. Now, Richard has always been known for being incredibly punctual with his merchandise for his employers, which means that he decides to ignore the alien species distress call and try and get his cargo to his employers in time. However, the call gets logged onto his system, and it is in fact illegal in the galactic milieu to ignore a distress call. So he gets his ship taken from him, he loses all of his contracts, and he is therefore disgraced. So he has decided to go to Pliocene Earth to try and make a new life for himself. We then also follow Felice Landry, who is an athlete with a violent temperament and latent mind powers, which have made her an outcast to society. She draws too much attention to herself in a society where everyone is trying to fit in at the moment. Everyone's trying to make a new place for humanity amongst the galactic milieu. Then we have Claude Majowski, who is a 133-year-old paleontologist whose wife has just passed away, and he doesn't really know how to live without her. So he has decided to go to the peaceful time of Pliocene Earth to end his days. The next person we have is Sister Amory Roccaro, who is a physician and a nun, and she is just tired of seeing so much death and so much pain, and she just wants to spend her days in the tranquil life that would be Pliocene Earth. Next person is Brian Grenfell, who is a social anthropologist who is going to Pliocene Earth to follow the woman he's in love with, who went 6 months earlier, Mercy. She went through the portal 6 months earlier. The next person is Elizabeth Orme, who was a Grandmaster Metaphysic. Metaphysics is essentially kind of like the magic system in this series. However, if you're going in thinking, oh, it also has relation to fantasy and therefore I'll like it, it has everything about it is science explained. So even if the science isn't very solid, it feels like sci-fi. So basically it's mind powers that people get upon ascension in the galaxy. So we suddenly start developing these metaphysical powers that every alien species has, but they had to teach humans how to use it because we were kind of a more primitive species, because we're the newest ones to enter the galactic milieu. Most people have what they call latent powers or no powers at all, which is basically that your powers are so subdued within your brain chemistry that you actually can't access them. But every now and then there will be a human metaphysic that is very strong, and she is one of them. So Elizabeth had these amazing powers, and she has now lost them through a serious accident. So she wants to go to Pliocene Earth, start a new life, and try and get over the trauma of not only losing the powers that she identified herself with and has been her strongest characteristic for years, but to also get over the trauma of having an accident, and also because what can she do now? Her previous job and her previous existence has all been taken from her. The last person is, there's two more people, forgot about Stain. Stain Olsen is a planet driller, so he's really beef and strong, and he always wanted to be a Viking. His main dream is to be a Viking, so he wants to go back to historic Earth so that he can be the first Viking on Earth. And the final character is Icon Drum, who was caught amidst a crime, and he has been sent to Pliocene Earth in exchange for not being executed. So his choices being either we put you in prison for life, we execute you, or we send you to Pliocene Earth. Now, given that the Galactic Milu can't actually control Pliocene Earth, most people opt for that because they don't know what kind of life they could have, but it will be better than death or being permanently incarcerated. Okay, that is just the setup. And oh my god, I am already 10 minutes into this video. Okay, now, once these 8 characters get to Pliocene Earth, all is not as it seems. They get there, and there are 2 warring factions of alien species that have invaded Earth. We have the Furlag, who are a small, stocky, very strong alien subspecies who are very vast in numbers, but are nowhere near as powerful as their enemies. Their enemies being the Tanu, who are kind of basically elven. They are tall and beautiful and very powerful, but they cannot reproduce very well. It takes a long time for them to reproduce, given that the amount of lifespan they have, they actually reproduce very little. But they have found that they reproduce much quicker and much more efficiently with humans, since they have been coming through the portal. The glitch portal, for want of another word. So, when they get there, they arrive in the Tanu part of Galactic Milu, of Pliocene Earth, and there they are interrogated, where they are able to find out if these people have metaphysic powers or not, latent or not. And if they have latent powers, they get given what is called the Torque, which is essentially a collar which enhances your metaphysic powers. If you have no powers, you get given a grey Torque. A grey Torque basically just makes you subservient. These people are used for manual labour, breeding if you are female, and for gladiatorial games. If you have metaphysic powers, then you are given a Silver Torque. A Silver Torque makes you subservient, but also enhances your powers so that it may be used by the Tanu in case of a fight with their enemies, with the Furlags, or in case of any greater need, for example, like a natural disaster. And then finally you have the Golden Torques. The Golden Torques are worn by the Tanu themselves, especially the very powerful Tanu and the royalty. And a Silver Torque bearer may in time earn their right to a Golden Torque. Whew. Okay, that's the setup. So they get there, and Felice's powers are latent, but she manages to hide them. So Felice being the athlete that I mentioned before, she has latent powers, but she hides them because she does not want her powers to be used. Claude and Brian are kind of treated more respectfully because of their professions, but neither of them have powers. However, Brian is allowed to walk around with no collar because, strangely enough, his profession of being a social anthropologist is actually very useful to the Tanu. Then we have Sister Amory, who is the nun, who gets given a grey Torque, or whatever you want to call it, and she is sentenced to being breeding stock. Essentially, they're going to use her for breeding, which she hates the idea of because obviously she is a nun, so she's technically never supposed to have sex, and now she's going to be used for breeding. They're also going to use Felice for breeding because she won't show her powers. And Felice is a lesbian, so not a great start for either of these ladies. Then we have Elizabeth, whose powers have now returned. So the travel between the Galactic Milu, where she was, and arriving in Pliocene Earth has reawoken her powers. So given that she would be probably one of the most powerful people on Pliocene Earth, she is instantly brought before the king, where he intends to wed her and have children with her. Then we have Aiken, who also has very strong powers that were latent, and he is offered a Silver Torque. Then we have Stain, who, the moment he gets there, starts trying to fight with everyone because he feels like they're imprisoning him, which they are. And then he gets given a grey top collar and is going to be used as a gladiator. Richard is also placed with a grey collar, as he has no known powers, and is going to be used for manual labour. Okay, so now that we're in Pliocene Earth, all of these characters somehow banded together just between when they met going through the portal and where they are now. They are a certain group. They go through in groups. They go through the portal in groups. There's no point in just sending one individual at a time for some reason. I don't know why. I didn't really understand that bit. But yeah, they go through in groups. So this group, they all know each other. They all care about each other. And they are banding together, essentially. Richard gets knocked unconscious basically the second that he gets there, because they're trying to discover his metaphysic abilities, which he does not have, and the process knocks him out because he tries so hard to prove he has powers, which he doesn't. Aiken not only has gone from being a criminal that was about to die to being like the most coveted person in the group aside from Elizabeth. So he is very, very happy. But yeah, it doesn't help his ego. Basically, the first book is that. It's them, and then the ones that have had their grey talks placed on them trying to escape. The ones who don't have grey talks placed on them trying to help the ones that are trying to escape so that they don't have to be used for breeding and gladiator arenas. But this first book is essentially a set-up book. Now, I had... the only issue I had with the first book was that as much as it was really enjoyable and it kept me reading in spite of the fact that it was a set-up book, is that I thought, hey, but these books came out a year apart, so it's fine for me now where I'm binge reading all 4 books. But if I had to read them a whole year apart, I don't know how much of an entire set-up book would stay with me. So I don't know if I would pick up the second book because it'd be like, oh, well, I can't remember any of it, so I just won't bother. That is where I would be wrong. In the second book, at the start of the book, you have essentially an entire chapter that is a very detailed synopsis of the first book, which means that this first book has a previously on that you get when you're watching a TV show. And I think that that is brilliant. How many pages? I think it has like 20 pages worth of setup at the beginning of the book. 22 pages worth of setup for the first book. So this book gets summarized down to 20 pages for this book, which is just basically that this is the really important stuff that might help jog your memory for all of the other stuff, which I think is really cool. And the setup book therefore felt so worthwhile once I knew this. So with the first book, my worry being, it's just a load of information. So if I forget any of it, will I enjoy the second book? The second book being like, I gotcha. Remember all of this stuff? Okay, now let's start, which I thought was brilliant. And now I want all those epic high fantasies that are like 700 to 1,000 pages long, where you're like, how am I ever going to remember any of this before I read the next book? They need to do this. It is amazing. It's so much easier. And the thing is that in the third book, having a summary of the previous books is great. But then in the fourth book, you have a summary of all 3 previous books. It's not just, oh, I'll summarize the previous book. It's, you get a summary of all 3 books at the beginning of the story. And then you start this concluding novel, which means that you could, in theory, obviously I wouldn't recommend it, but you could just read this book and read its previously on. And you'd at least get the gist of it, which I think is brilliant. So if you can't remember stuff because it's been a whole year, this idea is brilliant, and I don't know why we don't do that more. Okay, now, at the end of each book, you do get an appendix that is very different per book. In the first book, we have an appendix that is the Tanu song. So it tells you about the Tanu's sort of national anthem, for want of a better word. And the best part is you actually get the sheet music for the song. So you could technically play the Tanu song if you can play an instrument. And you also get a map. Now the map is it's of our world. It's of Europe specifically. We have the Pyrenees. We have France. It's cool. I like that. And a lot of it also gets set in the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean doesn't exist yet. The Mediterranean is either it's not a desert. It's inhabitable, but it's just a bit dry, and it's not got a sea in it yet. At the end of the Golden Talk, which is book 2, we have obviously an epilogue. We have the Apologia pro Giola Sua, which is basically just a discussion on the geography of where Earth is at that point. Again, we have this map, but we also have a map of a different part of Europe. And finally, we have the salt plates, which are actually in what is now the Mediterranean, but at the time was dry. Then we have in the Non-Born King, which is the 3rd book, obviously the map again. We have multiple maps. These are all the same. And finally, at the end of book 4, we have some aspects of hyperspatial translation and de-jumping. So it's like an elaboration on the science. So all very different feels to the endings of the book, where one you have a scientific explanation, one you have very detailed maps about the world, and then one where you have a song. So she's done a lot of effort in expanding the world past it just being, oh, well, this is all the things that you need to know. There's just a little bit more. It's like, oh, well, if you're questioning the science, here's some science for you. If you want to know a bit more about the culture, here is a song. If you want to know a bit more about the geology at the time, because obviously it is Earth, but it's slightly different because it's 6 million years ago. It shows you different aspects that I think would intrigue different people. So she's not just pandering to one specific part of her audience, which I think is really cool. Because, again, within the scientists that you have in the book, you have a paleontologist who, you know, with like the more physical side of science, but you also have an anthropologist who studies cultures. So the fact that she knows that both of these aspects are important, I think is really cool. Okay, so let me know if you are at all interested in this series, and if you're interested in me doing reviews that are 25 minutes long and that are dedicated reviews. Not enough people talk about this series. I've tried to keep it spoiler free. I hope that it is spoiler free so that I can actually entice you into reading this series. It's really well done. My uncle recommended these to me. He read them when he was in his teens, so when they first came out. He really enjoyed them. I'm looking forward to picking up the prequel trilogy. It was written afterwards, so it is a prequel trilogy. But I'm really looking forward to reading the prequel trilogy, which is about the rebellion that happens in the Galactic Milieu. I thoroughly enjoy the writing style. It's very approachable. It's very readable. Like I said, it discusses very dark topics. And yet none of it feels like it is for shock value, which I hate. I hate it when someone's like, oh, someone got raped. Are you shocked? And it's like, no, I'm disgusted. So she doesn't do anything without it having a consequence. You get characters with PTSD. You get characters who literally go insane. It's brilliant. And I would highly recommend picking up anything by Julian May if they're as good as this. That being said, I'll leave you to it. Thank you for sticking around this long, and I hope to hear from you soon. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to get more videos from me, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button and hit that bell icon for me to notify you every time that I post a new video. That's all from me for today. Goodbye, everyone.